Today we're going to talk about this, the ZPM Nocturne. Now this was a Kickstarter project, it had 1,500 backers and not a single unit was delivered. I didn't think it existed, but it turns out one of my Patreon supporters had one of the beta testing units and he got in touch and said, did I want to buy it? And yes I did. Now the story of ZPM is interesting, but what's more interesting to me is that you can draw a line from the failure of ZPM through to the creation of what I think is probably the most influential espresso machines in the last decade, a machine that's kind of revolutionized our understanding of espresso, the decent DE1. Now before you ask, yes, it does work, and yes, we are going to make some espresso with it, but let me give you the backstory on ZPM. The Kickstarter campaign launched back on December 11th, 2011. And this was back in the day when videos were kind of charming and not necessarily big budget affairs. Their plan was to use a bunch of off-the-shelf components combined with a couple of their own bespoke pieces, I think their own thermoblock design and group head design, to create a very technically capable espresso machine that was very, very cheap. Their proposed pricing for Kickstarter was $200 for this unit, which was a ridiculous price. Now the planned retail would be $400, but either way, for the kind of features they were offering, this was a very, very compelling proposition. When the Kickstarter finally closed, they had raised $370,000. Now, in terms of modern Kickstarters, that's not that much money, but at the time, this was the 6th highest funded Kickstarter in its history. Turns out their pricing was perhaps not sustainable. Something we do talk about on this channel is the challenge of manufacturers scaling up what they're doing. And I think people often underestimate how difficult it is to go from some kind of fully functional prototypes, which is essentially what this is, through to mass manufacturing thousands of units. I don't think they had the skill necessarily. I don't think they had the money necessarily to do it. Now, I'm not trying to pick over the bones of it. I just think they were very passionate founders who were perhaps in way over their heads. The project didn't fail quickly. In fact, it was October 2015, nearly 4 years after launching, that they posted their final update to Kickstarter. And when they had shared the fact that the company had ultimately failed and they would not be shipping units, the response from their customer base, from their community, was angry. So angry, in fact, that it generated enough interest for the New York Times to come and write a piece about ZPM and its community. Now, if you read the article, and it is linked in the description down below, towards the end of the piece you're introduced to a new character in all of this, that of John Buckman. Now, John you may know as the founder, the creator of the decent espresso machine. And in the piece, he's in talks with ZPM to kind of buy the remnants of the company. Seeing as John is in London right now, I thought I would just go and ask him in person about how his interactions and experience with ZPM maybe influenced his creation of the DE1.
So firstly, I saw the ZPM video and I felt like it was going to be quite hard for me to figure out how to make espresso as I had no guide. And when I saw this video of these two nerdy guys and they were both technologists and I'm a technologist, and I thought, I'm going to trust them to be my guides into espresso. And they told me what grinder to buy, which was great because I didn't know that either. While they were falling apart, my businesses were falling apart too. I had a music business and a book swapping business, and that was all cratering, and I was looking for something else to do. They one day sent an email out saying, we can't ship, we've run out of money, we're really sorry. At which point I happen to be in California, I give them a call, I say hello. It sounds like you need a little bit of money because they said we're so close to the finish line, we just need another $1 million or something. I don't remember what the number was. And I thought, okay, well I can write that check and take over and be a little bit of adult supervision. They brought the ZPM over with Blue Bottle beans and they made me quite good espresso. And so there it was, working, making good coffee. The next thing I did was call up a friend in Seattle because I happen to know La Marzocco and Slayer and Sinezzo are up in Seattle. And Bill Crossland, who'd been involved with the GS3, was one of the people who was willing to talk to me. Now, he makes a machine called the CC1. And what Bill said is, let me show you, kid, what the economics are of espresso. And he laid it all out to me. And he said, there's just no way you're going to make a machine better than mine at a cheaper price. What if I just sell direct? Then could I spend more money to make a better machine? And he said, if you're willing to sell direct only, yes, you can make a better machine. So Bill essentially sent me in that direction. And he also said, don't buy ZPM because it'll never get safety certification. And that was just him, his background. You're just going to die on that altar. And in fact, they were dying on that altar. That's what they were talking about, was the safety certification was never going to happen. But the real birth of decent espresso is finding that I think there's a market for what I call at the time Seattle meet Italy. So Italian espresso, which is what I liked at the time, but with a sort of Seattle spin of high-tech app, that sort of thing. And that would hopefully reduce the complexity of making good espresso. And then the second part, which was the launch of Decent Espresso, is everyone telling me for the amount you will spend to make ZPM come to market, you can start from scratch with people who've made espresso machines before, and you won't have any of their problems. Now, of course, I had new problems, but that's why I went in a new direction. Because I decided to start from scratch and make my own machine, the ZPM guy said, hey, wait a second, we've shown you everything. You need to cut us in here. And they're absolutely right? I saw the schematics, the software, I saw everything, and that was influencing the decisions I was making. So it took a while, but we got to a point where they licensed their intellectual property to us, so we could choose to use it if we wanted to, in exchange for some money, and most importantly, a coupon to all the backers of ZPM that they could apply in the next 3 years to Decent. It took me about 9 months to fall out of love with the approach that ZPM were taking, because I tried the same approach, which is use cheap components and a bit of software and algorithms, PID dust, magic fairy dust, PID will solve everything. That didn't work at all. My ambition for a machine that I would sell for $1,000 US, well, we had no product. And so what I thought I could make for $1,000 US using essentially 2 Nespresso machines bolted together would not make good coffee. So this became now a multi-year R&D project. And it turned out that heating on demand is incredibly inaccurate on espresso. And so we had to come up with new technologies to deal with that. What I realized was that we had no idea how to make espresso good with light roast beans. That was actually the problem I wanted to solve. I had this very strong feeling that the entire espresso industry was pre-scientific. They don't measure anything. They don't create testable hypotheses. And testable hypotheses and measurement are the basis of science. And we had no idea what pressure, flow, and temperature would make delicious light roasted coffee. So let's just make sure that it can do anything. And in the computer world, we talk about Turing machines, which is a computer that can run any software. The idea behind the Decent was to make a Turing-compliant espresso machine. So an espresso machine that could do any pressure, any flow, any temperature, because we have no idea what's going to work. In so doing, it became quite expensive to make and became a much harder project, but it also became much more interesting. So what ZPM really did for me is get me interested, get my team together, and look at cheap components and see what we could do with cheap components to make good espresso. And it turns out that if you spend millions of dollars and develop all this intellectual property, you can actually take the inexpensive components and get them to do your bidding.
And so that is how we go from the ZPM to the DE1. Very different approaches, but an interesting connecting point between the two. And I cannot understate just how influential this thing has been. By letting us track everything, measure everything, our understanding of espresso has fundamentally changed. How we see flow, how we think about channeling, all of that stuff has been revolutionized by the DE1. And I think it's fair to call it the most influential machine in a decade. But this is not a review of the DE1. That will happen eventually on this channel. This is a video about the ZPM. It's finally time to fire this thing up. See what it's capable of doing. Before we do that, though, there is a short ad for this video's sponsor, which is Surfshark. Surfshark is a fast, easy-to-use VPN service that is jam-packed full of features and lets you use unlimited devices with just one account. And this means that when someone sends me a YouTube video that's really interesting, but I click it and it says, no, this is not available in your country, I'm not tearing my hair out. I'm just 2 clicks and a few seconds away from being in whatever geolocation I need to be in to watch the video. And it's not just YouTube. This unlocks the streaming services like Netflix that lets me watch content that isn't available in the UK that is available in other places. I want to get all the value I can out of the streaming services that I pay for, and this is a great way to do it. More than this, it gives you an additional layer of security and privacy when you're online, whether you're at home or you're traveling out at a cafe or anywhere else. As I said, it's unlimited devices with just one account, and so they have apps for just about everything. Mac, Linux, Windows, iOS, Android, you are going to be covered, and I think that is amazing. If you want to check it out, you can click the link down below and go to surfshark.deal/JamesHoffmann and use promo code JamesHoffmann for 83% off and 3 months extra for free. Thank you to Surfshark for sponsoring this video. Let's switch it on. Every time I turn it on, my heart is in my mouth because I'm terrified I'm just going to break this thing and then it'll be gone. You know what I mean? Like I don't know if I could repair this. Someone could, but I couldn't. Anyway, it's on, it's heating up. Little temperature display here. It rockets up in temperature, which is kind of interesting. It's just got a little thermal block to heat in there. Now, this is obviously a US machine. It's running on 110. I've got a chunky transformer under the bench here to allow me to run this thing on UK power. But while it's heating up, we'll do a quick tour of the machine. It's pretty simple, but there's a couple of notable things on this particular unit. So obviously you've got your display on the front here. It's not a bad display considering its age and the price point. It's not horrific. It's not touch. That's okay. You've got these control buttons here, and this is something I'm definitely terrified of breaking. They just feel really flimsy and soft, and I have to be very delicate here. 2 sturdier buttons, one that says start and one that says mode. So because it's a thermal block, if you want to steam milk, then you'd have to change the temperature of this sort of thermal block to get steam. So it can't do both at once. That's kind of it on the front panel here. Little drip tray. Pretty nice. Now, you can see a water tank here. Actually, if I turn this to the side, you can see that the water tank does not fit because this would have been a custom part that would have cost a lot of money to make. They didn't get that far. So this is just, I assume, some other machine's water tank that sort of fits well enough, but it works. Also worth noting here, you appear to have a mini USB and an SD card slot. And impressively, we're actually up to temperature on the front. So we've got a little ready symbol at the top. It says 94.9 degrees Celsius. Lovely to see it in Celsius. Didn't even put that on myself, but the correct temperature display. So let's get into the menus of this thing because it gives a real insight into how this was going to work in terms of what you could program and what you could do with this thing. So you've got a couple of pre-programmed options here. You've got single, which says 93 Celsius, 9 bars, 25 seconds. And so 25 seconds says that they're looking at like a fixed time, not a fixed volume of brewing. A few machines work this way. They'll brew for a fixed amount of time, and you would adjust your grind to get the flow rate that you want, to get the kind of yield you want in that fixed time. Interestingly, the double pre-programmed here, same temperature, same pressure, 35 seconds. Which I hope is not suggesting that a single is just like a double cut earlier, because that would be wrong. You've then got settings, which we can jump into, and then I think you've got like a more manual thing where it's going to do the temperature and pressure that you want, but it won't cut off after a certain amount of time. Settings is, again, interesting. So you can adjust your PID values around a bunch of different stuff. So if we jump in, obviously your brew temperature, we tap in there, so you can set your proportional gain, you can set your integral gain, or you'll set your derivative gain. I don't know how to program a PID, if I'm totally honest, so I'm not going to mess with these values. Now, on the back screen, there's a little bit of immaturity in this machine. And so the fact that it says back that ass up, I don't know, I don't think you should build that into a daily espresso machine. It just feels kind of weird. It just feels a little bit childish, if I'm honest. It's not that I'm against immaturity, but you know, I don't know. It's just a weird little thing. I don't know if it would have made it to production if it was just for the beta units or something, but there it is. We should make some coffee. I think we're just going to pull manual. I think that's a good idea. I'm going to brew it at 94, I think, and I'm going to brew it 8 bars. Because why not? And there it is. It's programmed very quickly. So from a programming perspective, this is kind of a joy to use. This really is. But can it make good coffee? So let's brew, and this is interesting. So right now it's kind of getting prepped. You can see negative pressure. It's seemingly filling the hydraulic circuit, getting ready. Timer reads 0 still. Once we switch to positive pressure, okay, timer's on. Only about 4 bars of pre-infusion, and then it's going to really spike it up. So it's overshot there, so really need some PID control work done. Drops back down to about 8 bars, which is good. Temperature a little high. Now we it pulled a little longer than I'd want, but I think it's still worth tasting. Now, actually, just on the temperature gauge here, it's dropped down to like 80 degrees Celsius. So I wonder if it's got a bit of a declining profile here with the heating stuff. Now, some of you, like me, were you a backer watching this? Are you thinking, did I miss out or does it suck? Let's find out. It's got a weird acidity to it that makes me feel like the brew temperature is not quite right. Actually, we can probably test that. We do have a SCASE device that we can test the brew temperature with and see what it's actually doing in terms of temperature and pressure delivered onto the puck. Maybe we should do that. Let's repeat this and actually see what's happening inside the machine versus what it's telling us is happening. Okay, so we've got a SCASE 2 device set up here. This has a temperature probe inside there and a flow restrictor to mimic the flow rate of an espresso. That's running to this laptop. You can sort of, in a second, see what this sort of screen recording of this is. You also have a pressure gauge here, which is the sort of pressure including the loss of pressure through the puck. So typically this would read about a bar lower than you would see at a pump. So if it was 9 bars at the pump, you'd see 8 at the group head because you're losing about a bar of pressure through the cake. Anyway, let's see what happens when we pull a shot. So we're coming up to pressure here. Coming way up. Now that's quite a big discrepancy. Oh, that's interesting. So, looking at the brew temperature, it briefly spikes to about 91 degrees Celsius and then just crashes back down really, really quickly. And so it's brewing way below sort of target temperature almost the entire time. There's a little leakage here, pressure issue here. I think there's a problem with the group head solenoid. Touch on that in just a second. Hang on, let me stop this. Now, this was a beta testing unit that was out in the wild. So this has been sort of shipped, so to speak, to somebody to test. And so you'd expect it to perform a little bit more within spec than it was. So what you were seeing was it was thinking it was delivering about 9 bars of pressure. What you were seeing at the puck, though, was substantially below what you'd expect. The temperature piece, though, really, really just miles away. And so I don't know at this point if it just needs its settings tweaked, but that kind of makes me a little hesitant to think that's the problem, that's the issue, or if maybe it was never ever gonna do what they really needed it to do. It's an interesting artifact of its time. It's definitely got some interesting ideas in there. It's a sad story that they didn't get to deliver what they wanted to deliver, but I'm left wondering if they were ever going to deliver something that would have lived up to the expectations of the community and to the sort of technical expectations of really good, accurate espresso brewing. Now, to caveat myself again and over again, this has sat, not making much coffee for quite a long time. I think there's something trapped inside the group head solenoid. It's a little sort of electromagnetic valve that pulls a piston up and down to control a 3-way valve, and sometimes stuff gets trapped in there, causing a kind of leak of pressure from the boiler itself sort of through the system, and you'll see the group head dripping sometimes. So, this is not maybe in peak condition, but what its sensors are showing versus what we're reading with these sort of mechanical readings or accurate readings of temperature are quite a long way apart. And that would be a huge concern for me. Even if the maths was a little better, it was, staying on target when it was supposed to a little bit more accurately, it just seems to not really know what it's doing in that particular regard. And I don't know why that may be the case. I don't know if that's bad build, if that's bad componentry, if that's something else. They're using cheap parts by their own admission. Maybe that was the issue. There's lots I like about this. I like the form of it. I think it looks kind of cute. It's boxy in a charming way. I like the interface. It's simple. It let me do what I needed to do, but I'm not sure it delivered. I don't want to savage this. This is flawed. It's not working the way it should, but it's really interesting. And it will go to one of my Patreon supporters, because Patreon lets me kind of have a budget to go and acquire these things, test these things, and make these videos. And I'm very grateful to them. So this will be going to one of them in a giveaway soon. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Were you a ZPM backer? How do you feel now, knowing that for your $200, you may not have got what you wanted? I'd love to hear from you, whether you backed it or not, down in the comments below. But for now, I'll say thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.